of disciplines beyond those that we probably have in this room. I mean, I would say that it also covers humanities. I think historians would be an essential group to have in this kind of work. So to kind of make the scenarios legitimate in a scientific sense, we really have to involve a large range of disciplinary experts to make these storylines and how these worlds come about plausible, and to strengthen their validity for the scientific community. So that perhaps also means that in our just beginning work, we're building a framework for these different possible pathways in the future scientific development. As we bring in more social scientists, I imagine that we would also then submit the work we do, the papers we write, also to non-climate journals and to social science journals to kind of really get strong input from that community. Moving on to legitimacy issues for the non-scientific community, for the potential users of these scenarios, for decision makers, for the public. What would build legitimacy of these scenarios for them? What would make them authoritative statements of possible alternative futures? Well, you have to ask them, but so I'm just proposing three different components of what would build their legitimacy of these scenarios for them. And one, hopefully, is scientific quality, the same thing I just talked about, that they are rigorously developed in the scientific community, that they have involved not only different disciplines, but also experts on different parts of the world, on how different types of societies evolve. We cannot only rely on experts on European democracy. We have to rely on experts on a range of different socioeconomic contexts. The second component for building such a legitimacy would be a degree of participation and transparency from non-scientific representatives. And why is that? Well, I would see this as the primary reason here is that scenarios are inherently normative in a couple of different ways. On the one hand, there are implicit normative assumptions going into the scenarios, also when we as scientists build them. We put in assumptions about human nature, about the possibility we think humans have for collaboration, for long-term thinking, for various aspects essential for how we think we will be able to handle future challenges, our capacity for altruism, etc. And what drives internet, what drives the behavioral states. These things, yes, we do research about them, but there are also implicit normative assumptions there. And in addition to this, scenarios are inherently normative because they will have influence in policy. Or at least that's what we assume, or maybe hope, or think. So this means that a broad input from people beyond scientists, from different cultures and perspectives, are important, because then we need the representatives. We need to have diverse values and cultures represented in developing something that is going to be very in the middle of a science policy interface. And the third component for building legitimacy for a user community, I think, would be the usability of them for them. How practical are these scenarios for them to use in, for example, as a planning tool when they think about developing adaptation strategies, or how they take governance decisions, etc. So if they are going to be usable, then of course I would imagine that I would imagine that we need to ask them what makes them usable for them. What is it that they need as support for decision making? The easiest way to find out is to have them involved, at least at certain stages of the scenario development process. Finally, my final point is to say something about this endpoint versus pathways. The scenarios that we were discussing in the workshops, they are at the start of formulation. They have rough storylines, but they kind of take their starting points in 5 different types of end worlds in terms of adaptation and mitigation challenges. They describe, perhaps in less detail, how plausible stories of how you got to those worlds and what dynamics was it in societies, what dividing points, determining decisions were made in society to get to that world and not another world. What kind of governance institutions or what kind of choices were made that kind of foreclosed one pathway and not another one. So to develop those storylines with good input from various disciplines would be, on the one hand, only strengthen their scientific validity, but it would also mean that those who use them will have more information about how these future worlds became those future worlds. And also, I mean, Marcel was talking a lot about this in terms of also finding out what are the decisions we need to make to avoid certain of these worlds, whether at a global scale, that we don't want to end up in that particular scenario, but also in a decoupled, kind of in a local community, maybe we can take choices that kind of decouple us from the global pathway and set us on a different one in terms, for example, of adaptation capacity. I wasn't asked to give a punchline, so I didn't think of one. Sorry.
Thanks. So what we'll do now for the last 20 minutes of this session is actually to have a conversation. I want to have a room where we all face each other. We got this room, so we have to do it this way. Please introduce yourselves.
Stacy Vanderveer, University of New Hampshire. So there's a lot of interesting work going on in this presentation, but I gotta say, I feel in some respects have the same conversation about scenarios and integrated modeling exercises more than once. First of all, I was involved in a research project as several other people on the influence of integrated assessment models. And I just have to say, there isn't very much evidence that they influence people. So these mythical users, these mythical recipients of the modeling exercises, seems to me that they don't exist. And when I look at scenarios, repeated scenario exercises that do, for which there is social science evidence that they influence people, they are mostly not giant data runs. They are mostly more normative. They are mostly about participatory people being brought in to participate in learning through it. And they mostly have a defined community already. They speak to people where they are. And I feel like the giganticism that integrated assessment modeling goes to is very interesting to those of us who do some of these kinds of modeling exercises. Modelers love giganticism. But